Welcome to the Voices of Young People podcast, brought to you by Springtide Research Institute. In each episode, we hear directly from young people as they respond to our research and share about the issues impacting their lives. As sociologists and researchers, we see a new story unfolding for young people, one that moves beyond traditional institutional boundaries and requires careful attention to the inner and outer lives of emerging generations. At the intersection of being and becoming, it's the Voices of Young People.
Hey everyone, welcome to season 4 of the Voices of Young People podcast. And this season is all about work life. I'm Dr. Packard, the Executive Director of Springtide Research Institute. And this season goes along with the research that we've been doing for about a year now about young people's expectations from work, what they want out of work, and really sort of led to this project by this idea that kept popping up over and over again in the interviews that we were doing with 13 to 25 year olds and what we were seeing in some of the other research around Gen Z, which is increasingly they're just spending more and more time at work. And as they become disconnected from other social institutions, that sort of means that work has to do more. And young people are turning to work to find meaning in their lives, to sort of live out their identities and sort of make an impact in the world in the way that they want to, and in ways that in many cases the workplace has just never been asked to do before. This generation is not just asking, but is actively shaping their work life in those ways and looking for balance still among all of that between what they're doing at work and what they're doing when they're not at work. So we've got Marte Aboagye, who is Marte, you just came off producing all of the episodes for this season. How was it?
Yeah, it was so fun. I really enjoyed getting to have these 8 separate conversations with our young people guests who brought a lot of rich insights and anecdotes. Some are already in the working world. Some are part-time students, part-time working. Some are, finishing high school, but have high career hopes and aspirations as they're looking towards next steps they might take in terms of education to prepare for different career opportunities. So we get to hear from such a rich spread of young people in all different stages of life. And this season in particular, the guests range in age from 14 to 25. So that is a lot of different life stages.
People looking for maybe some after school and summer gigs all the way up to looking for your first full-time professional jobs, right?
I mean, the 25-year-old is like fully in his career. Yeah. And really inspirational entrepreneur. He's doing a lot. So yeah, it's who we listen to at Springtide in terms of when we say we listen to young people, we mean youth and young adults, but we really capture the gamut of this conversation just based on all those different seasons and stages of life.
Well, so we're going to hit on this later about like how do we even make sense of an age range that big from 14 to 25. We're talking about work life, and we've the approach we take at Springtide is to try and ask age appropriate questions here. We're not asking 14-year-olds about their experiences with their boss necessarily as much as we're focusing on that with people at the older age range. And we found some really surprising parallels though between like how to help that younger age range prepare for work and meaningful work and find it, and also then how to help those young people who are at the older end of that age range, actually who are in the workplace, do that same kind of thing, actually live out their meaningful work lives. But we'll get to that in a second. We've got some key findings though that sort of help frame up this report, and some of which I think came out in the interviews, and I'm curious to hear, but where you saw those in the season, but some that I think are just helpful for our audience to know. So first of all, young people told us that like when we asked them about work, and this is probably in some ways reflective of the pandemic, but this is in line with other studies that were pre-pandemic as well. They talk about anxiety, worry, fear, uncertainty. Like they're really concerned about the job market overall. Now, the kind of people who will come on a podcast and talk about their careers might be a little bit different from that. But I'm sort of wondering just emotionally, like sort of what did you see out of these eight interviews for the podcast?
Yeah, I wouldn't say they were devoid completely of anxiety, but by and large, I did feel a lot of hope and optimism across the board from these 8 guests in terms of them having just a real clear sense of what they wanted to pursue, what they really wanted out of a workplace setting, even if there were some uncertainties of what sort of next steps they might take to get into a specific career lane. They still felt a strong pull towards something in terms of this is where they use words like a sense of calling, a sense of purpose.
Even for non-religious, you're not going into religious, they still use calling.
Some people happen to mention different spiritual identities they held, whether the one guest, Avtar, he talked some about his Eastern philosophy and multiple Eastern religions in terms of Buddhism, and that he takes into consideration for his sense of meaning. I think Jesse also mentions meeting with a spiritual director and how his faith shaped his sense of calling and career in education. But that wasn't ever explicitly asked. It was just young people defining meaning in that way. But yeah, I would say language, even if someone wasn't particularly spiritual, language around a sense of calling or purpose pointed more towards what I mean by hope and optimism than just like scarcity or anxiety.
Well, that's so interesting that you say that, because that's a lot of, I mean, even though we certainly picked up on anxiety and worry and those kinds of things, those were not always necessarily decoupled from also being hopeful and optimistic. So
that's a good point.
In other words, the data are showing that young people are feeling a lot of emotions, and some of them at the same, a lot of them at the same time, that might appear to be conflictual. But I think it just points to how complicated this process can be.
And nuance. Yeah, it's not either or. Yeah.
When so much is on the, when we live in this world where we are detached from a lot of our traditional social support structures that come through institutions, we've seen that data for a while now. It's almost like we're putting more eggs in this one basket of work. And so there's like more riding on it. And so I think that's why we see more of these emotions. Critically though, we don't, there's a really important diversity story that comes out of this data, that it's we talk about finding meaning at work, and that for us as we were thinking about the research questions, sort of broke down along 2 lines. Can you find a job that you consider to be meaningful, or can you find a way to make meaning at the job where you're at? Because one of the things that we realized early on from even our first interviews with young people for the qualitative stuff, part of this research project, was that it's a real privilege to get to pursue a job that is inherently sort of objectively meaningful, that not everybody gets to do that. And we have the data that we display in the report sort of shows that breaks down in some ways that you might predict along especially race and socioeconomic status.
Yeah, one guest in particular said that pretty explicitly in terms of different opportunities she feels she's afforded than her parents and maybe grandparents were afforded. And that was Christina's episode, who gives us a really wonderful picture of her journey to find where she really felt like her different passions aligned, kind of where she would try out something here, like whether it was a major in college or a part-time job, and be like, that's kind of it, but not quite right. But where she's blended a lot of different passions and interests is in being a medical interpreter, and really has her sights on using bilingual skills with Spanish and English to help patients and practitioners navigate medical systems. And she says point blank that her parents wanted her to be able to find a career that did align with her passions, but she recognized that their hard work didn't always mean they got to have that same option in their choices. So yeah, that exact dynamic you're describing from some of our research findings was articulated from the guests.
Even the like who has access to people, just to give one finding here. So young people that have access to someone who can listen to them when they want to talk about or need to talk about their careers, 60% of our white respondents said yes to that question. I have someone who can listen, but only 40% of the people identified as Black or African American had access to somebody, which speaks to the real need for people to come along on this mentorship side, even before we get into the workforce. And Marte, you've worked with young people directly prior to coming on board with Springtide. I'm wrapping up my last semester as a professor. I've sat across the desk from a lot of young people, and I feel like I've seen this conflict in my own work, and I'm curious if you have too, where both of the universities where I've worked at have served not a majority, but a lot of first generation students, and a lot of people who have one or more non-dominant identities. And I feel really conflicted sometimes around that exact dynamic of like, boy, you might be capable of doing X. Maybe you should take a chance on it. These are the kinds of things that these are the privileges that I was afforded when I was in college, right? But at the same time, like I knew about their family background, and I knew how much like failing at that risk, which every risk comes with the potential for failure, would be consequential for them in ways that it wasn't for me. And I think it's really hard for mentors to figure out how to guide a young person through that process.
Yeah, I really hope that any sort of trusted adult who listens to this season of the podcast is able to hear just all the different expressions from these 8 guests of how much mentorship has been a key unlocking of networks for them sometimes in terms of jobs, a key unlocking of understanding themselves and their own passions, a key unlocking of feeling like someone's in your corner just when you're sending out resumes or you're bouncing off ideas for processing which directions you might go. Like every single young person had at least one adult, and some had multiple, who they felt like was on this journey with them, that they weren't just navigating this in a silo. And sometimes that was an older sibling who was already maybe in the working world and was able to provide certain guidance. Sometimes that was a parent. A lot of times it was a professor. And some students, they had already graduated from college or university, but they were still in touch with a professor who was still in their corner with them, even after they'd graduated. And quite a few mentioned mental health professionals or some aspect of a mental health professional who was helping them decipher not just pieces of their identity, but also who they wanted to be in the world and what sort of options they might pursue, to bounce that off of someone like a spiritual director, like I mentioned, Jesse pointed out. But even Lucy, our youngest guest, who's 14, she wants to be a child psychologist, which I thought is tremendous. I don't know how many.
I knew what a child psychologist was before.
I think I might have said that to her, but she kind of spoke of her own mental health journey and how much she had received from a therapist and how much she wanted to offer that to other young people in the future. So, multiple people everyone flagged a mentor or mentors, but it was interesting that multiple saw different mental health professionals as that key adult for them.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think is a really critical piece of this diversity story too, which is so often people who aren't afforded every advantage in life, they also come with this like somewhat constricted view of what's even possible in the world, just because of the networks that they've been allowed to have access to or the groups that they've been exposed to. And one of the things that we actually highlight in the report is the really critical role that we can play as mentors in sort of helping them to expand their networks. I mean, I've seen so many students over the years that, I would suggest a career for them. Maybe it was medical interpreter, and they would look at me like, they're like, I had no idea that was even
that
a job.
exists. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And as as adults and people with access to more experience and even as employers, where like, if it's a big organization, you might hire somebody who doesn't even understand all the things that organization does internally, and maybe even some of the external things, and helping cross-train in ways that can be a real point of equity and inclusion to make sure that people get exposed to those kinds of things. But let's talk about the structure of the report, because this is one of the, there are individual research findings that I think emerged that were really interesting, some of which we've talked about. But the overall structure is also one of these things that is both is really useful. So the report is divided up into two sections, one primarily aimed at employers and one primarily aimed at parents and guides and mentors and professors for the younger side. But the similarity between them is that what we were able to find is that those who were in their careers, what they really needed was opportunities for mentorship, an opportunity to make meaning or find meaning in their job, and an opportunity to grow in that position. And what we found from the younger part of that spectrum was that they were really struggling with wanting to make sure that they could find the right mentors, that they could grow enough to be ready for the jobs that they were getting, and that they could help discern what would be meaningful work to them. So mentorship, meaning, and growth ends up being this parallel structure across both of those groups, which I found to be sort of not just fascinating, but also incredibly useful, that we can sort of mirror these conversations throughout the lifespan of a young person.
Yeah, I think careers that naturally lend themselves to having a mentor were certainly mentioned, like someone who's going into education, having a teaching coach that's like assigned was highly valuable. But I think that sort of framework can be applied to so many different industries. Abdallah is an engineer, and I think he studied biomedical engineering, if I remember correctly. And I don't know if that's the exact type of engineering he's practicing right now, but he brought in just a lot of recommendations about what workplaces could do to better foster a sense of community. And so I think a lot of times people think of that sense of community being between peers, which it certainly can be. And I think some of his recommendations applied in that way. But I think a sense of community in the workplace can also include strategic mentors, whether those are assigned from a supervisor or whether, there's sometimes a formal ask. But I think for any adults listening to this, for them to see like, oh, young people want this. I don't have to just wait to be asked. You might be asked, hey, would you be a mentor to me in pursuing this career or in this new workplace I'm navigating? But you also can extend the invitation yourself, or you might form some sort of committee or structure that helps partner different younger employees with people who have more experience within the company or organization.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And again, back to that note, especially younger people, and we saw that too with regards to race and gender, as well as these other intersectional variables that will actually reduce the chances of somebody speaking up and asking for a mentor. So putting programs in place that aren't necessarily targeted at a group of people, but will benefit them, is another point of inclusion. And it's one of the highest values that young people have for an organization that they want to be associated with these days. Well, Marte, this is great. I want to give, just to name them all, right? It's Abby, Afthar, Christina, Jesse, Lucy, Matt, Tatum, and Abdallah, which are these 8 episodes that are going to follow this episode. And in each one, you're going to get to hear from them straight up what they are hoping for out of work. And it sort of helped, for me, these seasons are always great because they help to bring the data to life. So thank you for all of your hard work in putting this together. I think it's going to be a really great and illuminating season for people, whether you're an employer or you're a counselor, a parent, a religious leader, somebody working in the life of a young person. This is the kind of stuff that they need to hear and understand. And they'll be able to get the report work life from us at the end of May.
Yeah, we're so excited that people are listening to the podcast and subscribing to it and really finding that we are genuinely presenting the voices of young people, their real perspectives, their real experiences, and this work-life conversation, no matter what, like you said, no matter what sort of angle you might be approaching it from, there's a lot of good information shared. So we're looking forward to getting your feedback. You can always share that with us by dropping us an email, but also connect with us on social media, where we'll be highlighting these episodes as well.
Yeah, We Are Springtide across all the social media. And this season, we'll be bringing some of those tide-turning tips that we embed in the report to life at the end of each podcast episode. I'll be joining the conversation to share some actionable things that you can do based on the findings that we've got and the conversations that are taking place on the podcast. Well, thanks again, Marte, and everyone for listening. I'll be looking forward to this season just as much as everyone else.
Thanks.
Visit springtideresearch.org to hear more voices of young people and access our full study on young people's expectations and experiences of work, titled Work Life, helping Gen Z flourish and find balance. Sign up for our newsletter and be the first to learn about our upcoming research. Today's show was produced by Marte Aboagye and TJ Birnbaum, with original music by high school student Christian Unthank. Special thanks to our guest today and all the young people whose perspectives and insights make our research possible. Remember to find us on social media at We Are Springtide and learn more about our brand new Writer in Residence program at springtideresearch.org. Thanks for listening.